I think that's awesome. We definitely have a big variety of influences, so it's a good way for everybody to get to learn who we are and what got us here.
I guess I started with the podcast too. So, okay. So, basically, like, if you can think back to when you first started getting into music, like, you can talk about like your favorite band that you first kind of got into, or if there was an instrument that grabbed your attention that you first kind of dove in on. Like, where'd you get started with this whole thing?
Yeah, with music in general, I'm not spending a lot of time on it, but it dates back to my childhood. I actually started off playing saxophone, believe it or not. And I just wanted to be active in something in school. Actually, my mom pushed me to be active in something in school. And I was like, you know what, if I'm going to do something, I think music seems like it would be a good choice. So I picked up saxophone and I loved it. I did jazz band. I did it for a few years. And what actually made me switch to drums is kind of a funny story, but you can't judge me for it. Is I used to sit there next to, at the time, my good friend Trevor Dennison. He was another saxophone player. And when you're playing an instrument, you have rhythms, right? But you also have notes to worry about, just like you're playing guitar or anything like that. And we would spend the entire band practice, well, I guess the class, right? We would spend the entire class going over simple rhythms like 1, 2, and 3, 4. With the percussionists, they couldn't get it. So with our group of band that we had like great musicians, but our percussionists, no offense to anyone, right, it was awful. So they had actually reached a point where I approached the band director, and we had jazz band tryouts coming up. And I said, Mr. McKenzie, I want to switch. I want to play drums. I want to play drums for jazz band, and I want to play drums moving on out. I think it'll be better. And he, long story short, he didn't want me to do it, and said it just didn't make sense. You've never played drums. My mom went to fight for me. She bought me an old CW drum kit, and I set it up. And a week later, I made jazz band. So that's how I got into drums. And from there, I never touched saxophone again. I probably couldn't play it if you asked me to, but that was how I got into drums at first. Did
you end up doing any drums for like marching band or anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. That's I think what gave me a huge foundation in music. Like I put a lot of my success in music, or whatever we want to call it, into what I learned in marching band, believe it or not. So yeah, I switched to drums. I was in marching band through all of high school, and I was the percussion leader, and I played quads. And what was so cool for me is the band director really saw me as someone who didn't just show up to band, but wanted to do this, like do a lot with music. So he gave me a clean slate to rewrite the entire drum cadences for everybody, all parts, cymbals, bass drums. And in doing that, I was learning how to read music. I was learning real verbiage, right? That's carried over very well with some members in our band now, just being able to be on the same page. And if I didn't do that, I can without a doubt say there's a lot of fundamentals that I wouldn't be where I'm at now. That's where it all started.
Dude, that's awesome. I didn't realize. So we have kind of a similar story with that, because I also started on saxophone in like 5th grade because I was like, I got to join band. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I hated it. I was terrible at it. Like I wasn't good and I hated it. And I had asthma back then. So that's my excuse. But ultimately I probably just didn't try hard enough. But then I switched over to like snare, and was just kind of like the low man on the totem pole. But then it was kind of like you kind of have a lot of times in band, it seems like they take the kids that are kind of rambunctious, like the ADHD kids, and just like, I don't know, give them cymbals or something. And so our percussion section wasn't super great. And so that allowed me to end up playing quads as well. So I didn't get to rewrite any cadence or anything,
that's
but
awesome.
It's cool. I didn't realize we had that in common. So
yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, it was a lot of fun too. Like, I mean, I can say from all of high school, band, marching band specifically, without a doubt, without question, was my favorite part. That's actually, to throw in here a little side note, I mean, that's where I met my wife, was band camp. So, I mean, it's just so much of my life came from band and music at that point.
That's funny. It's another thing we have in common. You met
Holly? Yeah, there you go.
Holly was a snare drummer in the band while I was playing, but we met in a musical, but it was the same deal. Like the music program. And that's kind of what I've noticed lately as a teacher is like, man, the music program at a school, it's more than just the music itself. It's like a family. It's something special there. So I get that, man.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
So what kind of music were you listening to back then when you were in high school? Like,
Yeah, so I remember this transition crystal clear because it's kind of odd. I had an overprotective mom. I love her to death. She loved me, but I wasn't allowed to ride my bicycle off the property, like on the road, until I had my driver's license. That was her philosophy. So it never happened. Obviously, I chose my car once I turned 16. But she was overprotective, and it was a country style of life. We had horses, grew up riding horses, and the only thing I knew of existence was country music. Honestly, as sheltered as I was, I can say I did not know rock exists, metal exists, much outside of country and jazz. This is cool because that was in band. And then I don't remember exactly how I discovered it, but I remember I was at fair because we showed horses in 4-H for the week, and that's pretty much sitting there just all week long with nothing to do. So I was listening to music all the time, and I got my hands on a Blink-182 album. And it was as if like a light bulb was just turned on. Not that I thought Blink was the best band ever, but at that point, only hearing country music, it was just like, oh my, what is this? What are these guitar sounds? What is this drummer doing? And then right after Blink, it was Sum 41. And I would say my true passion in music kind of started off from that, and it was a lot of punk rock, Blink-182, Sum 41, Alien Ant Farm back in the day, and then it kind of progressed as high school came along. I still listen to that stuff. I just bought Blink tickets this week, so I still listen to it now. But my passion really went to a little bit heavier music. I started discovering a lot of Christian metal bands, Christian rock bands. Anberlin was a huge influence on me. Nate Young is a phenomenal drummer. And then the first band that transitioned me to the style of music I've just been locked on for, the last 15 years was Under Oath. My good friend, Matt Grabowski, was in a band with me, first band I was in, and he gave me an Under Oath album because I was totally against screaming. I was like, man, that just sounds ridiculous. How can you just listen to people screaming in a microphone? And he gave me this Under Oath album, and I took it home, and it was almost like when I heard that Blink album, like, oh my gosh, the emotion that you're able to convey through singing and screaming and putting it all together. And that's the same genre I'm at now. Is I love bands that just have a little bit of all of that.
Do you remember that Under Oath album? Was that They're Only Chasing Safety?
It was, absolutely.
That was a huge one for me too.
Yep. And I still think that's probably my favorite album from them to date. There's been a lot of great music, but that's just a complete nostalgia feeling anytime I hear it.
So I'm curious, because we may have a similar story here. In fact, all 4 of our band members may have a similar story. When you were only exposed to country music, and then it was Blink, and then from there you mentioned you started getting into Christian music. Were you raised pretty, like you said you were raised pretty sheltered or whatever? Were you raised in a pretty tight Christian home as well?
My story with faith is pretty interesting on that side. So the answer is no.
Okay.
My father is about as against faith and Christianity and any form of religion as anybody you could meet. My mother is a Christian now, but at the time was not. She lived a good lifestyle, but I did not have really any Christian influences in my life except my grandparents. Music, Under Oath specifically, is part of what got me curious about Christianity and started some of that endeavor. So a little different. And then from there, my parents on one side kind of followed suit. So you're listening to Blink and Sum 41 and all that, and then Under Oath was sort of like your gateway into the Christian music world. Is that kind of what you're saying? Yeah, because for me at that time, it was like it was this realization of, oh my gosh, there's music that just sounds incredible. And the message is positive. Like this can go hand in hand. Obviously, it'd be a stretch to label Blink-182 a Christian band. So at that point, I mean, I had awesome music, but it kind of contradicted where I was at that point in my life. And Under Oath was able to bridge those together. And it was a very awesome point.
Yeah, that's unique because my story was more of like I was raised super Christian or whatever. So like getting into Under Oath for me was it was kind of because I couldn't get into Lamb of God or whatever. Like I wasn't allowed to get into heavy music in the secular world. And so I took like the Christian knockoff or whatever, but I know obviously Under Oath is not that at all. I mean, I love all those bands anyway, but you're the first person I've talked to that like came to Christian music because it was good, like Under Oath, it was good enough that it grabbed you. It wasn't because you had to, because you were a Christian or whatever. It was just solid. That's cool.
Yeah. And they're another group that's definitely stuck with me. I mean, as soon as the reunion tour was out, we bought tickets right away. My wife and we were there. And I mean, it's just, I still absolutely love them.
Which, where did you see them for that reunion show? I'm curious.
Believe it was in Detroit. I know I should remember this.
Okay.
I have videos of it on my phone, but like the venue is blurring a little bit. I think it was in Detroit though.
I think it was that same tour. My brothers and I went and saw them as well. I don't know if it was a reunion tour, but they played through all of They're Only Chasing Safety and then all of Define the Great Line, like back to back. I saw them in Cleveland at the Agora and it was super cool.
Yeah, I know it wasn't Cleveland. I'm pretty sure it was Detroit. If it was House of Blues, if they played there, that's where it was. But I have a lot of videos. I just can't remember.
Right. That's awesome. So, okay. So from there, Under Oath, and you're starting to dive into Amberlin and all this other stuff. Like, I mean, I know you haven't evolved too much from then. I mean, that's kind of where you are now, but I know like you've been into Beartooth for a little while. Ice9 Kills, some of those bands. So can you talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I would say some of my favorite bands in the genre, as you just said, Ice9 Kills. I think they're phenomenal. The level of theatrics they're able to bring in an authentic way is just there's nobody else that I've listened to that I think can touch it. My all-time favorite band, I can't not mention them, is actually Silverstein. They've evolved a lot when you listen to them. They used to almost fall into that, I don't want to say punk rock, but more rocky, edgy, maybe some light screaming emo rock, if we want to call it that. And I loved them back then. And as my taste kind of evolved to being heavier over the years, surprisingly, they have too. And if there's one band that I could just say defines drumming style I like, music style I like, it would absolutely be Silverstein. But any band that fits in there, you have I Prevail, Of Mice and Men, Wage War. I mean, the list goes on and on. Era, Silent Planet, and one other I can't not mention is La Dispute. They're a band not too many people have heard of. If you love poetry, check them out. That's really what it is words, focused lyrics, and an ambiance to really complement the music they're doing.
That's cool. That's another thing that's kind of rare is like a lot of bands as they grow and change, fans like them a little less because the fans want to hear them play that same album and write another album that sounds exactly the same, and stick with that same thing. But the bands themselves, and we know this, like we want to grow, we want to explore new avenues and try to mature with our music. And I finally get that now because I remember I was like frustrated with a lot of bands I like Reliant K was a big one I loved back in the day. And I remember like, I felt like they were going less punk and I was like, come on. So that's cool.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more because that does happen a lot. I think bands hit a point where they're not focused so much on trying to just do the music that the fans are going to want to hear. It's time to experiment a little bit and do stuff we haven't done before. And when that happens, people love it or they hate it. So I've definitely seen that happen quite a bit on my side too.
So this is kind of a funny question. I don't know how to phrase this, but you and I've talked before about with this band. It's kind of like it's a really heavy object, a really heavy ball that we're trying to roll in a direction. And all four of us are kind of pulling in different directions. And like Aaron Collins, for example, he's our singer. He's got awesome metal scream. He's got an awesome singing voice. Like he's really good, but he really pulls towards the heavy side. He likes metal. He likes that real heavy stuff. And Vince tends to be that a little bit as well. And we'll hear more about them in their episodes. But if you had to pick, like, if you were pulling the band in a direction, or if you were having an influence that you were inserting into the band, what do you think? What would you call that, or how would you describe it?
Yes. So I love heavy bands and I love screaming, but my personal belief is screaming is best put where there's a need to convey the emotion of the lyrics at that point. So I love catchy melodies being part of songs. I love most when you put those together. There's a lot of bands that are always heavy. There's a lot of bands that maybe once in a while jump over the edge, but they're usually focused on catchy lyrics and catchy melodies. And then the bands that I love the most hit both of those. I mean, they're I don't want to say all over the place, but it feels like they have a lot of styles coming together to best put the song out. And that's a big focus in me. Another thing I just love in songwriting, I've noticed recently, my top 3 or 4 songs all have this in common. One I shared with you recently, a new Silverstein song. I love drastic, harsh changes in songs when you can go from a verse to a chorus and you totally feel some sort of energy change. And that can be a drum part, it can be a guitar part, but definitely a balance between heavy and I don't want to say soft, but melody to complement the lyrics at hand.
Cool. I dig it. So the goal of that is so people listening to this, when they're listening to our next song that we write, for example, to see if they can hear the Nick influence, like, oh, okay, they didn't scream the whole time this time. So that I can see maybe that's where Nick,
absolutely.
And I'm sure they'll find out in my episode as well. I'm very similar to you. I'll be pulling in that direction. I'm finding the more shows I go to, it seems to me like the bands that actually sing more, tend to be better. Like I'm not saying that it takes no talent to scream. Obviously it's a gift. It's very difficult to do. But like you said, if we can mix good screaming with good singing, that's what I'm pulling for as well. So
yeah, absolutely. I'm with you. And I think we align there quite a bit.
Well, this is what I wanted to accomplish with this episode. So it doesn't have to be super long. I mean, we're at like 18 minutes now. I just kind of wanted to give everyone a taste of where you're coming from and kind of what your influence is. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other guys. And then these will be our episodes. So
cool. One thing I don't know, it's a little off now. But if you squeeze it in, I think it's one thing that I would be doing myself a disservice to not mention is from Under Oath, right? So I fell in love with Under Oath, and around that time, if you think, I've now been playing drums for about 4 or 5 years from when I switched through high school. Now I discovered this new kind of music. So as a musician, like I have to learn how to play this stuff, right? And Aaron Gillespie, if you listen to him, it's not straightforward drum beats that you learned in high school or marching band. So what I actually did, and it took quite a while, it took a few months, and that's locking yourself, not locking yourself in a room, but figuratively just putting hours and hours and hours and hours into something every single day. I played the Under Oath album song by song by song by song until I could play the album straight through and feel comfortable in how I did it. And I didn't know at the time when I did that, but that formed so much of a foundation of how I play drums now, the fills I choose to do. Aaron Gillespie, a lot of times, instead of just ending, on like 4 going into 1, he'll go on 4, but then he'll carry 1 into 2. I do that all the time. So Aaron Gillespie played a huge role in my drumming style and writing style in music.
Yeah, that's cool. That's definitely good to include. And are you into the Almost too, obviously?
Yeah, I like it. I don't like it as much as Under Oath. It's probably part of mental block when, the Almost is going, he wasn't in Under Oath. And at that point it's, Under Oath wasn't there anymore. It wasn't the same band. Right. So it was like a bittersweet thing, but they had some good music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's cool to include. And also that's another thing that I did similarly. Maybe this is just what musicians do, but like I learned guitar to Reliant K album. So I played The Anatomy of the Tongue in Cheek. It's like 18 songs. It's a longer album, but I did the same thing as you. It was like learn every song and be able to play through the entire album. And it's really cool. I don't know if I've seen that influence my guitar playing per se, but it helped me learn. So anybody out there wanting to learn an instrument, just pick your favorite album and just play it.
Yeah, lock yourself in a room and don't come out until you got it. You're good to go.